folks, today we've got a complete deep dive comparison extravaganza between the brand new Tacx NEO 3M and the also almost newish Wahoo KICKR MOVE. Now, both of these trainers are at the top end of their respective companies' trainers list. There's nothing higher on either side from either Garmin Tacx or from Wahoo, except their smart bikes, but that's an entirely different category that costs like twice as much. Now, of course, the key feature on both of these trainers is movement. They both wiggle. See that? Wiggle, wiggle. Both of these trainers are considered additive in their respective lineups, meaning this is not replacing the Tacx NEO 2T, which is down for like $900 on sale right now, insane deal. Just like this is not replacing the existing Wahoo KICKR V6, that's also cheaper as well. They are just simply higher end options. Now, this video has a dozen different sections, chapters, whatever you want to call it, for all the different things. I thought this rabbit hole would be easy. My rabbit holes are never easy, and this one's just kind of crazy. And note that while you may think you know the winner here, because you probably do, the reality is there's a surprising number of differences here as I went down this rabbit hole that make it a really interesting conversation for both products, especially depending on where you live in the world. So I'm just going to go through these sections. You can use the doohickey at the bottom there to move right along. The very first and probably one of the easiest sections is price. The price of the Tacx NEO 3M in US dollars anyways is $1,999.99 or $2,000. This over here is $1,599, $99, $95 maybe, or $1,600. So a full $100 difference between these two. In Europe, there are some slight differences though in those price points, where this one here is $100 more, it's $1,699, but this remains the same at 2,000 euros. Both of these companies include a 11-speed cassette on there, that's included in the purchase price, and neither company offers 12-speed cassettes, which is bonkers in 2023, almost 2024. Either way, the winner here for this section is Wahoo because it's cheaper. It's as simple as that. Next, we've got the unboxing and the setup experience. That's pretty straightforward. They both took totally different approaches. In the case of Garmin Tacx, they created this new like crazy zipper box that you can unzip the whole thing. That's pretty cool. In the case of Wahoo, they've got like a new slide out box that basically is slided out the side. I mean, both these companies like went all in on box engineers this time around. And then when it comes to unfolding those legs for proper storage later on a closet or whatever the case is, it takes the same amount of time on both of them. You just fold this thing up, and this one you just squish it in, little wheel locks there, and then locks on the underside here. It's like literally a 20-second operation at most. So this category is like a solid wash between the two of them. And hey, a quick note before we go any further, if you're finding this video interesting, useful, entertaining, or just really darn long, just go ahead and whack that like button at the bottom there. It really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. Next, there is bike compatibility. How likely is it that your bikes are going to fit on one of these trainers? And to be clear, for both of these trainers, it is pretty darn likely your bike's going to fit. There are certainly going to be edge cases, and that's what I really want to focus on. Both of these companies obviously spend an insane amount of time and money both testing in-house and also sending these trainers out to various bike manufacturers for validation as well. However, in the case of Tacx, there is more places for potential failure on your bike, as I saw with my bike, where it's more difficult to get the bike on the trainer, especially if you haven't geared down to this gear here, the outer gear. If you're one of these gears up here, you can't get it on without a bunch of gymnastics. In the case of the Wahoo KICKR, it doesn't really matter what gear it is to get it on the trainer, it just gets it on. Likewise, in the default configuration on this trainer here, my rear derailleur just kisses the very bottom of this little frame section by like just barely touching it. Tacx says I can go ahead and add the two included spacers to push this out a little bit, and that'll solve that particular problem. I haven't done that yet because I want to swap to a different cassette anyways, and they'll do that all when they do that there, but that is pretty close. On the backside of both these trainers, there's also clearance potential things to think about there. Garmin says they added about 2 millimeters of space on this to try to resolve some of the clearance issues that people have had on the Tacx NEO series in the past. In Wahoo's case, there really isn't clearance issues anymore in the back end of their trainer based on the way they designed this. It just simply has more space around it. Either way, from a winner standpoint, it's going to be Wahoo just because the fact that like there's really nobody that has clearance issues versus over on the Tacx side, it just gets really close. So next there is app compatibility. And to be clear, both of these trainers are totally compatible with all apps out there today. Both of these trainers support dual ANT+ and Bluetooth Smart across the board. They support all those same standards, ANT+ FEC, Bluetooth Smart FTMS, and so on, identically across the board. There are still some minor nuances there though. In the case of the Tacx unit, it supports 2 concurrent Bluetooth connections. Wahoo supports 3. Now, sliding into more advanced data, the Tacx unit will broadcast left-right power, so your power balance, versus the Wahoo unit does not. Inversely though, the Wahoo unit has a so-called race mode, basically higher speed data up to 10 times per second. That's been adopted in the last year or so by Zwift and other trainer apps, but mostly Zwift, to basically give you an advantage in races. Tacx does not have that today, but it is something that the company says they're looking to implement, but they don't have an exact time frame for that. Likewise, the Tacx NEO 3M is also missing built-in Wi-Fi. It's something that the Wahoo KICKR series does have, both the KICKR V6 as well as the KICKR MOVE. For whatever reason, Tacx decided not to include that internally. Instead, lets you have the privilege of buying this little adapter for 129 bucks that you stick in the back of the unit, right back here, and then it just hangs down, and that's where your Wi-Fi and Ethernet if you want it in there. And again, in the case of Wahoo, the Wi-Fi is built in, but you can use this if you want to Ethernet. So it just simply snaps in there like that, and then you can go ahead and plug in your Ethernet on this side, and you're good to go for a purely wired connection. That costs, I think, about 79 bucks, so it's cheaper than Garmin's offering. This category, the clear winner here in my mind is Wahoo, just because of the Wi-Fi, but also the race mode side of it. While Tacx does have that left-right balance and the speed cadence sensor, I think practically speaking, the Wi-Fi is just simply more useful in that realm. Okay, so next we got the big category, which is movement. Now, the reason why you want movement is because it reduces fatigue, especially on long trainer rides, and probably even more so on some of those erg mode or structured workout rides where you've got really long sections where you're not moving much on the saddle, versus like a sprint race or something like that, you're constantly probably getting up off the saddle and stuff like that. But point is, movement is the thing that all these companies have been chasing. And in the case of Tacx, they've got up to 5 centimeters of total movement on this track as I move it forward and back here, 2.5 centimeters either way. And the way both of these things work is there's basically this little like track that kind of tips up at the end to sort of rock back and forth there. In the case of Wahoo, they've got a bigger track and more tip at the end there. So they've got 14 centimeters of total movement compared to the 5 centimeters over here, 7 centimeters forward and back. And the whole track length gives it just a better feel. Here, both of these are perfectly fine if you're doing really steady state work, but when you go to sprint, that's when you notice the difference the most, because this you get a little more sway, a little more swing, if you will, before you hit the end of that track, versus Garmin's, it's like boom, end of the track, it's right there. But that's actually not the only type of movement there is. There's also the tilting movement. If you look from the back, kind of the tilting side to side. That's something that Wahoo's had on their units via their KICKR axis feet. I think you can see these up here in the corner there. Those feet basically just compressed to give you a little bit of movement. Again, it's not much. This is not a rocker plate on either one of these companies. This is basically just to give you that little bit of sway, if you will, back and forth. And the same is also true of the Tacx NEO series. That's actually been there since the very beginning as well. And that comes from basically a little bit of engineering design in this to give it kind of flex left and right just a tiny bit. As you can see from these shots from the back, there's no real difference there. They're both very, very minimal from the left and right side of it. Anyways, from an overall movement standpoint, the winner here is Wahoo because it just simply goes further. It's a bigger range of movement, all that stuff. They say like size doesn't matter, but it matters here. It matters quite a bit. Next, there's road feel realism. This is like a bit of a catch-all bucket. There's a lot of components to this. The very first component is inertia. How do both of these feel when you accelerate and decelerate? And the answer is that part of it's a wash, to be honest. I've said this a few times recently, and for actually years, in fact. I think if you put really smart industry people on both of these trainers and blindfold them and put earphones over them so they can't hear any minute differences there, I don't think most people could tell the difference. I don't think most consumers could tell the difference. They are so good for both of them from an inertia standpoint. However, there's more components to it than just that. The next piece is how much they can simulate from a gradient responsiveness standpoint. In other words, how much incline can they simulate? In the case of the Wahoo KICKR, it is 20% incline versus over here in the Tacx NEO 3M, it's 25%. Again, I don't think that's that big of a deal. Like, it's not a huge advantage here because nobody wants to go up 20% hills. Don't pretend you do. You're lying to yourself. You don't actually want to do that. So instead, we go to the next component, which is the downhill side of it, which we all enjoy. So in the case of the Wahoo KICKR, when you go down a hill, it doesn't do anything. It just, like, if you were to stop pedaling going down a virtual hill in Zwift, this would eventually stop. It's as simple as that. Versus on the Tacx NEO series, because of the magnetic motor inside, they will actually drive this entire thing forward. So it literally feels like you're accelerating down the hill. It's a really cool sensation, and it's something that Wahoo actually implemented in their Wahoo KICKR bike, their V1 and V2 bike. The last realism section is that Tacx can actually recreate the road feel, the road surface feel. So it can recreate cobblestones, or going over a cattle grate, or paved roads, or wooden bridges, and all these crazy different things, because it has this magnetic motor that it basically like stutters, and it's an astoundingly like good representation. It's one of those things the first time you feel it, you're like, holy crap, this is mind-boggling how they do it. Now, over time, it becomes less of like a holy crap sort of moment. It becomes one of those like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Which is ultimately why, from a road feel realism perspective, this entire category, the winner is clearly Tacx. While both of these have equal inertia, once you get beyond that one component, this wins in pretty much every other category of realism creation. Now, I can already hear you right now screaming like, oh, but the KICKR connects to the KICKR Climb. And yes, that's why I have it in the next category. Because it's not included in this thing. You spend another $700 for it. And if you do spend that $700, then you can take your bike and rise the front of it up and down, up and down, up and down all day long. And it is a cool thing. I do find that in general, when it comes to KICKR Climb, people either love it or are like, whatever. I kind of fall in the camp just because, I don't know, it's one of those things that I like it when I use it, but when I don't use it, I don't think about missing it, if that makes sense. Like I think it's cool, but it's one of those like, I don't miss it all that much. Even on the KICKR bike that I bought, I virtually never use it just because I always forget to press the button and it's like, oh, that's whatever. On the Tacx side, you can't connect it to Wahoo's KICKR Climb because Wahoo doesn't allow that. You can, however, connect it to the Elite Riser because this through axle is rotating now on the 3M, so that does allow that. I haven't tried that yet, so I don't really know how well that works. Tacx does have their own little party trick, if you will, which is they've got a light below this that glows the ground. They're different colors, like purple and red, depending on how hard you're pedaling. That's just so-so. Point there being that from this category perspective, I'm going to give it to Wahoo just because of the fact that they have a KICKR Climb option that you can buy, and it's definitely cheaper than the Elite Riser that you would buy for this, and the integration's a lot cleaner as well. Okay, next a quickie category, which is noise, volume, all that fun stuff. These two are both darn quiet. It's as simple as that. Basically, for both of these, the main noise factor is going to be how clean your drivetrain is and whether or not everything's all indexed correctly on your rear derailleur. If that's all cleaned and well maintained, it'll be virtually silent on both of them. You will hear a very slight hum of the motor on this one. Primarily, if you do really hard efforts, you'll hear it, but that hum is just, it's very, very subtle. Like, it's way less than your breathing. It's way less than anything else you got going on in the room. So I would consider this perfectly fine for both of them. I mean, a technicality you would give it to Wahoo being like the smidge bit quieter, but practically speaking, both of them are perfectly quiet, and I don't think that's really a factor in this category. Next, we've got accuracy, and accuracy is one of those categories that has different components in it as well, and I've dove deep into this in my full reviews that are linked up above there, so I won't rehash all that stuff, other than to say two things. First is on accuracy compared to the established power meter baseline, and I have many different power meters I test with, and both of these are accurate in that realm. Like, I have zero complaints on the output of the power numbers given from both of these units. The next piece, though, is the accuracy of resistance in erg mode or structured workout mode. And that's a case where Tacx does take the cake. They are much better from an erg mode responsiveness standpoint in maintaining the level that you set, in particular for big power jumps. For example, in 30 by 30 type workouts, where you might be going from 150 watts to 450 watts over and over and over again, this does not overshoot at all, versus this will overshoot by on average like 20 watts. For this, it was like 1 to 3 watts at best. Up until now, 20 watts was actually pretty decent for that first second or two, but then you see this and you're like, damn, that is really impressive. So for the overall accuracy category, I'm going to give it to the Tacx NEO 3M, but mostly just because of the erg side of it. And I know I could like split categories different ways and divide it up, but look, I already have a dozen categories as it is, and trying to subdivide them even further is just silliness for silliness' sake. Next, we've got the built-in app, another quick category here. The built-in app for both these companies is perfectly functional for configuring settings and doing all that kind of stuff. However, that free app does differ when it comes to features beyond that. In the case of the Tacx NEO series, the free app is mostly just limited to, again, that like core functionality there of updating firmware and that kind of stuff. Whereas if you want all the extra things, you've got to pay for that. All like the built-in rides and all that kind of fun stuff, you got to pay for that. And the same is true for Wahoo. You got to pay for those rides too, and actually a slightly separate app. But in Wahoo's case, that free app also does a bunch of base recording options if you want to do workouts with that app, structure workouts, for example, as well as in syncing to a gazillion different training platforms out there, different ways to export the files and all that kind of fun stuff. So from a free app standpoint, in terms of what they offer, Wahoo wins. For most people, if you're using Zwift or Trainer Road, whatever the case is, that won't really matter at all, but I figured it's kind of worthwhile mentioning. Next, there's the distribution, warranty, support, all that kind of stuff. And again, another bucketized category, though the winner would be the same if I split them out either different way. First is distribution. Where can you buy these trainers? By far, Garmin wins on distribution. That's what makes Garmin one of the most successful companies in the business, is they have so many places that you can buy the product all around the world, all the distributors, all the retail shops, all that kind of stuff. They win like on pure scale in that sense. The next piece then is support. Where can you get that support? Can you get it in all these random little countries? And again, that's an area where Garmin tends to win. Not so much as can you get support, but who is providing that support and what's the level, the quality of that support. In most of Garmin's cases, it's being provided by Garmin themselves, versus in Wahoo's case, it varies a little bit on country to country in terms of how distributors handle that and stuff like that. Also, overall, I would say, like, if I look at feedback I get back in the video comments and my written review comments, there are very few people that are upset at the Garmin Tacx support in terms of how that's provided. There will always be outliers in either case, but on the whole, I hear far more complaints about Wahoo support in the last 1 to 2 years than Garmin Tacx's. And again, that's just like a factual, how many people leave comments being upset about support in one or the other camp, and there's just more comments here about being upset. The final thing to keep in mind is from a warranty standpoint, the Tacx NEO 3 series falls under Garmin's everything in the Tacx and Rally camp gets 2 years no matter where you are in the world, versus in Wahoo's camp, the 2-year warranty is only for Europe, versus in the US, it is just a 1-year warranty. That's something that definitely might matter to people in the US where they don't have that 2-year warranty they would have over here. Okay, so where do we stand overall? Well, I'm not gonna like total up all the categories because frankly, it doesn't matter much. They're weighted different ways. Like how do you weight like the inbox app versus movement or whatever the case is there. Instead, I'm just gonna tell you what you wanna know, which is the winner. That's all you really care about. And in my mind, if you're gonna spend $1,500 for a trainer today, it's probably gonna be on the Wahoo KICKR MOVE. There are, though, some exceptions to that. Number one, if you're looking for the best structured workout erg mode type trainer, this is currently the new king. It was the Ceres Hammer series, but this has taken the cake by like a long shot here. So if you're like, money be damned, I want the best structured workout trainer thing, this is that trainer for you. Likewise, if you want something that has the best road realism, including like the downhill drive and the surface simulation, all that kind of stuff, this wins too. On the flip side, though, this has more movement. And if you want the most movement, I mean, this is clearly the most movement. Ultimately, I think for Garmin to be more competitive here, they just really need to do 2 things. And they're not big things in the grand scheme of things. One, they need to reduce the price of this to, I would say, $15.99, $16.99, maybe $17.99. And they need to include this in the box. It's as simple as that. You do that, boom, then it's an incredibly competitive landscape. Keep in mind, the Tacx NEO series has always been about $200, 200 euros, more expensive than the Wahoo KICKR series, and for various reasons. And I don't know, some of those reasons are outlined here before around downhill drive and stuff like that. If you made these prices kind of parity to what they were before and included this in there, that becomes like a game on type discussion. Because ultimately, this is a fantastic trainer. There's like technically nothing wrong with it. It's just not priced appropriate to the market today and what the features are relative to this thing. It's as simple as that. With that, thanks for watching. Have a good one, and see you next time.